This photo is the beginning of our genealogical journey. This is a photo of my grandmother, Elizabeth Blanchard Sipe. And we wanted to demonstrate how to begin researching your ancestors by using my journey of discovery as an example. My interest in family history was inspired by this woman, actually, my grandmother. Because of her, I began tracing my female ancestors back for 4 generations. That has been really important to me. She was incredibly important in my life, and the discovery about her history, her ancestors, and continues to just really move me deeply. So that's kind of who we're holding along the talk today.
Here's an outline of what we hope to cover today. I won't read it all, but just to show you an example of our path. We'll be covering a lot of basic information about genealogy, research, and all its various components. And then we'll be using 2 case studies, like Sally was just mentioning, looking at her grandmother's family and ancestors along that line. Those are the Blanchards and Barretts of Louisiana. And then we'll talk toward the end about the filing systems, the way to keep all this information organized, both in paper as well as digitally. And finally, we'll give you lots of resources and avenues to explore after today's session. So starting off, what is genealogy? The definition that I came up with, just to keep it very simple, is it's the quest to know our ancestors and their family relationships. To do that, of course, we go on a scavenger hunt for records. Many of those records might be at home in our attics, our basements, or our closets. Some of them may be with other family members, documents, photos, things like that. Of course, more and more records are online, and we can access them through various websites. And some records are best found in the community at various different repositories, and we'll talk more about that. Our commitment in gathering all these records is to organize them, to prove that they're accurate or not so, and then to preserve whatever it is that we find for not only ourselves and our families, but for the community at large. All through, it's important to remember that this is an enjoyable experience, sometimes frustrating, but enjoyable. And I like to think of what Ben and Jerry said: if it's not fun, why do it? So the basic objectives of genealogy could be stated this way. Each person on your family tree will be defined by their vital information. That is, information about their birth, marriage, death, and of course, who their parents were and their children.
This is a picture of some of our stacks at the library. It's kind of fun to look at this because we haven't been able to be inside the library for a while very much. A family tree is more than just names, dates, and places. It is a symbol of living history. When our society was founded in 1974, we were called the Napa Valley Genealogical and Biographical Society. Our name has changed for simplicity, but our dedication to preserving life stories and family history remains. So we kind of have to ponder, why explore family history? The motivations to explore this are many and varied. Some possible reasons might be curiosity. There's a universal motivation. Where did I come from? And what's my story before that? How did I get here? We need to preserve our history, keeping memories and stories and traditions alive. It might be motivated by medical history. Knowing the health conditions of our ancestors can help make better choices for our own health. Connection. The desire to meet new family members, is a pull for some people. Distant cousins may become friends, or at least companions in the pursuit of a common past.
And finally, our motivation might have to do with feelings of respect and gratitude. If you walk into our library today, you'll see this sign. It always reminds me that our work honors those who came before us and can be a benefit to those who follow after us. Remembering itself is a form of gratitude for what we've received. So before we get into some of the more nuts and bolts of the research, I'd like to just take a moment or two for a brief visualization. And if you'd like to close your eyes, you can do that. You don't need to. But in your mind's eye, just kind of walk into this picture. This is showing me on a path in Maine through a forest. And let me see. We all owe a debt of gratitude to the genealogists who have come before us, not just our own ancestors, and the people who have shared their knowledge and experience as researchers. I like to think of genealogy as a huge forest with endless paths, one where it's very easy to get lost. For a moment, imagine yourself standing at the edge of this forest, eager to set off on your adventure. You notice that all the paths begin with a question. Which question do you choose? Once you choose one and you start down the path, you notice that your question is bouncing happily in your knapsack and everything just seems wonderful. Soon enough, though, there are smaller paths that begin branching off in all directions, each one offering a different route to the answer. How do you decide which one to take? Suddenly, you realize you're lost. You can't see the forest for the trees. Your question is starting to weigh very heavily on your back, and the answer seems to be getting farther and farther away. So you take a seat on a tree stump, take a breath, and ask yourself, what was it they said in that beginner's genealogy class? What do I do now? In this next section, we'll talk about what to bring in your knapsack to help you find your way. Like I said, it's easy to get lost in the wilderness of facts that confront us. Names, dates, places, relationships, occupations, and on and on. To be successful in your research, you need proven methods and reliable resources to help you steer clear of those paths that just go in circles, or the ones that lead to dead ends. And perhaps worst of all, the paths that convince you that the wrong answer is the right one. A good way to get started is to keep in mind two basic genealogical principles or guideposts. One is to always work from the known to the unknown. So using this family tree here, I wonder if doing this test means that I can't have a cursor available to me. And that might just be, okay. I would point, but I don't think that's going to help. If you look at the bottom of the family tree and imagine yourself as one of those people, you might be interested in somebody up toward the top and might be tempted to just jump there and start looking at old records and to find your ancestor. There's a danger in that, though, because that person up there that has a name that you think is your ancestor might be really somebody with the same name in a different tree. So it's important to start slowly, start with one question at a time, and resist that urge to skip generations. The other principle is, as you go along, remember to write everything down so you'll know where you've been and how to get back there, and you can cite your sources if you need to in the future. Now, here's a great way to write things down as you go along. It's an example of a research log. This one happened to come from AmericanAncestors.org, but there are many others out there. You could design your own, make a custom research log. Or really, if you had a spiral notebook and a pen, you could keep track that way. But the important thing is to write it down. Research logs remind us to document every source of information that we investigate, and to say what we found or what we didn't find. Even negative results, not finding something, is important to note. We'll know not to go back there again. Another advantage to research logs is that they allow us to take a break from our research. Let's say our life is very busy and we can't research for a month or so, and we get back. Just by going to a research log, we can know where we left off. And that can help us to avoid a duplicate search. I can't tell you how many times I've gone back over the same path, forgetting that I've already been there. So what are we looking for? We're looking into various types of sources. First, we'll be talking about home sources, but in general, sources are documents, publications, websites, artifacts, or people that provide information about our ancestors. Home sources are those things that I mentioned earlier that might be in our attics or basements or closets. I may have a list, oh, here it is, to share a little bit more about what some of those things are. It could be a family Bible. It could be a photograph album. It could be a diary. It could be letters, many different things like that. A home source could even be your own memories. It's important to write them down. Another one that people overlook sometimes is just talking to living relatives, especially the older ones. What are their memories? Do they have photographs or other kinds of documents that might be useful? Moving on to online sources. Here's an example of the websites that we have on our computers at the library that are incredible sources of information. And as a member, you would have free access to all of these sources. I thought it would be interesting to note if you were to join each one of these at the basic level at home, the total cost would be over $600. You can get all of this for a $30 annual membership at our library. Many of us, of course, might have one or several of these because we like to work in our slippers and robes at home. But again, you can't beat the value. And not only do you get these at the library, but then you have access to other people to consult with. And here's the bank of computers. There's 4 of them there waiting for customers.
Actually, we have more computers there than that, but this fit into the picture. So
Right.
There's 4 of them.
Right. And finally, we look for sources in the community, and places where they're stored are often referred to as repositories. And examples include libraries like our own, archives, museums, historical societies, other genealogical societies, town halls, county offices, even funeral homes have records. In preparing this slide, I even thought, well, you know, a cemetery is a type of repository. When you walk out there and look at the headstones, each of those headstones is a record. All in all, Sally and I have had many research trips across the country visiting repositories, and I can remember many of the ones I visited and the discoveries I made, so they can contribute to wonderful, memorable experiences. And here's a picture of our library stacks, our repository, with, well, I should say that there are many books there representing sources from all 50 states. Not only books, but publications and journals. So it's a wealth of information and a big table there in which to spread them out and work. I chose this close-up of the Louisiana section because Sally's family was from Louisiana, and we actually looked in these and found specific references to her family. And her family, many of her family members were plantation owners, and so there's wonderful information about life on the plantation. So you can find specific information about your family, but lots of other background information that might be helpful in your research. What kinds of records can we find in all these sources? Well, here's a list of the types of records that a genealogist might consult. I prepared this for use as like an index in my family folders that I'm going to talk about later. And it's a way that I organize the different type of records pertaining to my ancestors. You know, just because you found a record and you're excited about it doesn't mean that everything about it is accurate. So we have to go each time through a step of record analysis. And these are some common questions that you can ask about the record to determine how reliable it is. Is the record an original or is it a copy? Things can happen when things get copied, so it's important to note that. When was the record created? If it was created close to the time of an event, that it adds to its potential of being more valid. If it was created long afterwards, then there's a chance for misinterpretation or forgetfulness. Who created that record? If you found it in a county office, for example, was the clerk somebody who was quite educated and experienced, or was it perhaps somebody who was new to the job and less experienced? Who provided the information in the first place, or who was the informant or the recorder? That can tell you a little bit about how reliable the information might be. And finally, if it was in a publication of some type, is the information cited about where it came from? Many times information is published, but it's not cited, and you should always question the validity of that. It's helpful to keep that information, but keep looking for citations. An important type of record that we're going to look into are vital records. These are birth, marriage, and death records that are kept under governmental authority, like I mentioned, state or county or local level. Oftentimes, these records about an individual will include references to their parents or a spouse, so it can add to our knowledge about that individual. And as I said, depending on that particular state, those records may be held at a state, county, or local level. Some vital records now can be accessed online. We can actually see certain images or indexes of those records. But keep in mind that there are privacy restrictions, and we may not be able to access some more recent records or records with sensitive information. And another thing to keep in mind, despite their official nature, vital records can contain mistakes. And we're going to show you an example of that right now.
This is a vital record of my mother's death. This is her certificate of death. She died 3 years ago. At the time when she died, my sister had been living with her for 20 years and was somewhat in fragile health herself. And when the recorder at the mortuary asked for the name of my mother's mother, she got the first name right. She said Elizabeth, but if you look down and you find Elizabeth, you look across and she listed the last name as Barrett. I can see the cursor here before, but it's not here right now. So, so the last name is listed as Barrett.
Oops, I'm sorry. How do I go back? Let's see.
Click.
There. I was trying to find the cursor, but okay, go ahead.
So her last name was actually Blanchard, and I noticed that mistake when I was doing research. And so I know that she was Elizabeth Blanchard, and there are numerous other artifacts and documents that I have that prove that her last name was Blanchard. But it is important, you know, to cross-check with other documents as well, because there can be errors.
It's interesting. At one point, vital records were the gold standard for how to begin your formal research after collecting your home sources. But now with online access to fully indexed US Census records from 1790 to 1940, the census has actually replaced vital records as the place to start your research. 1790 was the very first year that the census was taken in the United States. And the last one that's available online is 1940. The reason for that is that the census records are sealed for 72 years before they're made available to the public. So we can all look forward to 2022 for the release of the 1950 census. Another thing to note is that before 1850, the census did not name each member of the household. What that means is that the only name that appeared was the head of the household, often the male, the adult male. And his spouse and their children were listed simply as tally marks in various age groups. So that's important to remember. Online resources for the census, the gold standard here is Ancestry.com, just because it has the most complete set of images and indexes. But you can also find census resources on FamilySearch.org. The nice thing is that is a free site. And you can also find some census material on AmericanAncestors.org.
So this table is a display of the home resources. It's family memorabilia that was gifted to me over more than 40 years. Some are handwritten family trees, copies of official documents, pictures with notes written on the back, local history books, newspaper articles, and maps. There are also some notes I wrote during conversations with my extended family members. And searching for home sources and interviewing relatives were my first steps in this research. This is a cartoon that shows a young researcher using his home sources. And he says, I'm doing research for my autobiography. And he is starting with his baby book, which is the home source.
I'm hearing a dog. It sounds like we have an eager genealogist with 4 legs out there.
Yeah.
So the organization about what you have is really important, and we'll be talking more about that and showing you examples. But Mary Herzog, in her teaching of the beginning genealogy class, had this to say about it. Genealogy can be seen as one big puzzle. If you don't put the pieces together in just the right way, you'll never get to see the final picture. To make sure your puzzle pieces end up in the proper positions, you should use genealogy charts and family group sheets to record your research data. So thank you, Mary.
Here's an example of a pedigree chart, sometimes called an ancestor chart. This one has 5 generations, and you'll notice it's based on Sally's family. You can see her there on the left. First of all, note that each individual in the chart is numbered. So Sally is number 1. Her parents, Carl and Gloria, are 2 and 3. And then in the next column, there's her 4 grandparents, numbers 4 through 7. Each person is defined by their birth, marriage, and death data listed directly under their names. It's important to point out that all the information on this chart came from Sally's home sources, except for the information highlighted in pink. That we'll be showing with you is something that we discovered through our research. If you look all the way to the bottom right, you'll see William W. Barrett and Mary C. Smith. The reason I have 2 colors for Mary is that I decided to highlight Sally's maternal line in yellow. So starting with herself, going to each female, all the way back to Mary Smith, because that was the line that she was interested in exploring. But when we began, we didn't know who Mary Smith was. That was going to be just simply a pink highlight. And that's what we had to discover through research.
So after reflecting on my pedigree chart, I decided to focus on my mother's family for 2 reasons. One was that my grandmother that you see pictured, Elizabeth Blanchard, was a really important person in my life. And the second reason was that I was named after my great-grandmother, her mother, Sarah Dishman Sally Barrett. And I heard stories about her when I was little from a lot of different people about what she did and how she lived. But I was really curious to know more about her and more about where she came from. So in this picture, she's sitting, Sally Barrett is sitting on the top step. And my grandmother gave this to me when she was in her late 80s. And she told me that it was a picture of my great-grandmother, it was Sally, and that she was holding my mother, so her grandchild, on her lap. So I just have treasured that picture and it's felt like I wanted to learn more about her. So the question that came to me was, who were the parents of Sarah Dishman Sally Barrett?
So going back to the pedigree chart, Sally's next step was to go generation by generation and develop a thumbnail sketch of each family unit. And that's what we call a family group sheet. We'll look at that in just a minute, but what you do on a family group sheet is list each fact and back it up with the sources that led you to that fact. Then that becomes a way to decide where you need to move next. So what Sally did is she started with her grandmother, as she said, and she worked back in time from the known to the unknown to finally discover the identity of her great-grandmother's parents. And we can see here now that that was William and Mary.
So this is a family group sheet, and it's a family group sheet of my grandfather, Micah Sipe, and my grandmother, Elizabeth Blanchard. Everyone called her Bess. And you can see on that family group sheet where she was born. And then if you look up, the marriage date is usually under the male couple member. So it has her marriage date and place. And then on her section, it has her death date and place. And it's listed, her father's name was Francis Alexander Blanchard, and her mother's name was Sarah Dishman or Sally Barrett. If you look to the far right of all those listings, you'll see little numbers. And those little numbers, 10, 15, 11, 2, those refer to the index for sources that Mark showed you before, kind of where he got that information, where I got that information. You'll notice if you look down underneath my grandmother, there's another Elizabeth Blanchard, and that was her first child, who was born on the 29th of January and died on the 30th of January.
It's the anniversary of her death.
So today is the anniversary of her death. That was a pretty sad event in their life. And they did go on to have my mother, Gloria. And so she's listed there. And my mother lived until she was 94 and died 3 years ago. This is a census image for the Blanchard family. And there are a couple ways you can look at census images. This is one of the ways. If you look down at the bottom, you can see that the father is listed first, and it's F.A. Blanchard. And then underneath that is Sally. And then underneath that is all of their children. And on the very bottom is Elizabeth. The information to the right gives you an insight into who they were, what they did, that kind of thing. And you can kind of look at that and look over the rest of that information, but I'm not going to talk much about that today. You'll look at the top and you'll see that the census taker, the person who was the transcriber of the information, was Corey Blanchard, and that was an uncle, actually, of my grandmother's. This is another census transcription of the Blanchard family. This is another way you can get that information and look at it. And it talks about Elizabeth Blanchard, and her mother's name is Sally Blanchard. And it says her mother's birthplace was Louisiana. If you look at the middle of the page, you can see that. So there's two things about that. I want to just note that it said she was born in Louisiana. And then at the top, look at the way that Elizabeth was spelled. Now, that was not the way her name was spelled. And so, I know that because I knew her, but also because on other documents, I can cross-check and see that her name was spelled differently. It may have been that the person who transcribed the information couldn't read the handwriting or just was in a hurry. It could be, probably a variety of reasons, but we'll see that on another census, it's different than that. So this is the 1910 census transcription for the Blanchard family. And it has Elizabeth's name on the top, spelled correctly. If you look down, it says the mother's name is Sally Blanchard, and her birthplace is listed as Texas. So now we have two birthplaces for her, and we really don't know. So we'll go on to the Sarah D. Blanchard obituary. and that would have been, my great grandmother. And this obituary was done, the information was provided by her own daughter. And she was a really good historian and provided a lot of details about dates and months. And she identified the mother's birthplace as Texas, not Louisiana. The obituary also provided her birth date, the name of her spouse, his death date, and the name of her surviving children and grandchildren. Again, her oldest daughter, Lillian, proved to be a fairly detailed historian. This came from newspapers.com. So this is the Blanchard Barrett family group sheet. Thanks to Sarah's and Frank's obituaries, I was able to complete much of their family group sheet with appropriate citations. And I used primarily obituaries and census data to do that. You'll notice that Sarah Dishman Barrett was born in Nacogdoches, Texas on the 12th of November. She died in Louisiana, in Alexandria. And her parents are listed on that: William W. Barrett and Mary C. Smith. So the question that I had, that I started with, was who were her parents? And I know the answer to that question. Underneath that, you'll notice that there are 5 children listed. And on the right side, you'll notice that my grandmother, Elizabeth Lowry Blanchard, is the last child. We do know from notes that I took from my grandmother that my great-grandmother had a set of twins after Elizabeth, and they did not survive. So I don't know if they were stillborn or what actually happened, but one of them, one of their names was Adelaide. So I don't know what the other one was, and might be something I try to figure out down the road. So this is the Barrett 1870 census transcription. To verify the information from the obituaries and look for further information, I went to the 1870 census because Sarah was born in 1863. This would have been her first census listing. Her father's initials, W.W. Barrett, made online searching a challenge. So try and remember that if you're searching, because sometimes they list the full name, sometimes they'll list just initials, as they did here. William's birth year and place may help identify his parents, and Mary's birth year and place may help identify her parents. So this is a future project that I could do. This is a copy of an application for the Sons of the American Revolution. And in searching Ancestry.com for Mary Smith, who would be my great-great-grandmother, I discovered applications to the Sons of the American Revolution and the Daughters of the American Revolution, which are 2 well-known lineage societies. The Sons of the American Revolution application was filed in 1924 by a descendant of Mary. He proved that his ancestor, Mary, was a descendant of an American Revolutionary War patriot. To become a member of the DAR, I would also need to prove my line back to Mary, which would be relatively easy at this point because I've already done the research back to Mary. Another future project might be related to this man, William Barrett Travis, who was an attorney, American lawyer, and soldier who died in 1836 at the Battle of the Alamo during the Texas Revolution. Family lore has included many stories about being related to this man. My grandmother and her sisters and other members of the family growing up would tell stories about that. But I don't have any proof about that. So I wrote notes down from her that indicated that Travis was either Sarah Barrett's uncle or cousin, and initial research attempts have come up kind of empty, but I'd like to resume those efforts and work from the known to the unknown and write everything down to see what I can find.
So now we're looking at a family folder. And this one happens to be with all the materials related to Francis and Sarah Blanchard. We're showing this as an example of how to organize the paper records that you have. This is one kind of tried and true method. So for each family, you create a folder and list the surname and perhaps the name. Here I put both Frank and Sarah on there. And I start on the top with an index, the record types you see on the left, and the numbered citations. And then right under that would be the family group sheet. You're seeing the first page of this family's group sheet. And then behind that, kind of in the sequence that I've established in the index, there would be some vital records, a census record, obituaries, and finally, a manuscript. This is the handwritten family tree of the Blanchard family that Sally's grandmother gave to her. So this is a wonderful way to keep your materials together and to make them more accessible. I think there was something else I was going to say about that. Yeah, that making it accessible is important, because if you need to look back and find something, this is a way to do that. If you want to share it with somebody, or at some point if you're writing about your family, you want to have this information. Another thing I find is just it helps with critical thinking. Being able to just look at something and reflect on it will help you make connections, maybe create a hypothesis, and then develop a plan. So highly recommend doing something like this. Nowadays, though, we don't just have to do everything with paper and pencil. In the digital age, we have other ways that many people feel are more efficient. So once again, we have a quote from our beloved Mary. This is part of what she would often tell beginning genealogy students. Record keeping used to be done with paper and pencil, and required the recopying of basic data every time you wanted to prepare a specialized chart, I think. Modern genealogy takes advantage of dedicated genealogical software and programs which allow you to enter information about each of your relatives just once and to link them all together in their proper relationships. Many different charts and lists can be generated automatically with the software without having to recopy anything. This dramatically reduces the chances of errors.
Thank you again, Mary.
Here would be an example of Sally's pedigree chart, but one that was entered into a software program and then printed. This happens to come from the American Ancestors website, and they have an online program called Ancestries. The beautiful thing about this is that this pedigree chart and this family group sheet, both of them were printed out in just moments with information that was only entered once. So the information gets populated in the different formats. And you'll see here that everything about Francis and Sarah is there, including, where they were born and so forth, and Sarah's parents. And the children, the first four, don't have much information because we haven't entered it yet, and we haven't discovered it all yet. But at the bottom, Sally's grandmother, Elizabeth, is well represented with her vital information.
So in thinking about next steps, Mary again gave us this wonderful statement. Remember that this is just the beginning. There are many more record sets to explore, many more things to learn. First, you learn by doing so that you discover what you don't know. Then you increase your knowledge through reading, conferring with more experienced researchers, and taking classes and seminars. Just the fact that you're taking this little class with us today is an indication that you have kind of taken a step in the direction of finding your ancestors. We hope that turns out to be a good experience for you.
The next step that you can do from home, and this is important for all of us now in these times, is to go on your computer and do some Google searches for these following learning centers. And I'm just going to just walk you through this for a moment. American Ancestors, if you put that into Google, you'll come up with americanancestors.org. And on their homepage in the upper right, you can click Join Renew. Now, don't worry, you're not going to be paying for anything because they're going to give you an option to sign up for a free guest membership. Once you do that, then you can navigate to their online learning center and click Getting Started. There's a wonderful tutorial that includes a lot of the information we've covered today and much more. So I would highly encourage you, if you haven't already, to look into that. Another tutorial option is through FamilySearch.org, and you could just, to get to the right place on their website, you could just Google search Family Search Learning Center, and you'll come up with something they call popular lessons. The one that I'm recommending is I Didn't Know You Could Search Like That. Family Search is one of the most amazing research tools. It really gives us access to many of the records that are stored in the library in Salt Lake City, Utah. But it's tricky. There's things it takes a while to learn how to use it. And this tutorial will show you just how to do that. In the process, you can create a free account to search the FamilySearch.org databases. I should just mention here that you can do that from home, but we also have this loaded at the library. And because we're an affiliate library to Family Search, there are many more records that are available there that may not be available at home. Finally, another great place to go is the Ancestry Learning Center. And if you Google that, you'll get ancestry.com. And they will show you in their Learning Center the option to click Getting Started Consultant. This is kind of nifty. It gives you a little quiz where you answer 9 questions. And based on your personal experience with doing family history, and then they will return to you a personalized step-by-step report on what to do next. How great is that? When I just played around, and I'm a member, we are members of the New England Historic Genealogical Society and their program, American Ancestors. But just for the fun of it, I went into did a Google search and clicked on the guest membership. And this is what they sent me in an email, was their Getting Started guide. Again, a wonderful tutorial and with lots of great ideas.
This is the contact information we mentioned in the beginning about getting the information that we've been presenting to you. Tess Harper is our hostess, and you can email her to get flyers, the packet of information, or you can go to the Napa Valley Genealogical Society and email us there, or go to our website and contact us through our website, or you can call us on the phone. It's important to remember that when you do decide to, take the next step, whenever that is, or whatever that next step might be, the library really provides, just passionate volunteers that are very much interested in helping you along the way. Right now, that's been through the internet primarily, but when the library opens again, and we hope that that will be soon, at least by appointment, so someone can meet you there, you'll be able to, just go ahead and then access all of the advantages to being a member, if you choose to do that.
I would just add that if you do contact us and request the handouts, we will have them ready to send back to you probably by the end of the week.
So just before we go, or get off the little slide presentation, I wanted to just let you know too, this is a picture of a basket that is available through our current online auction. You can access that through our website. And it's an auction that 100% benefits the library, which is 100% run by volunteers. So, the basket is a genealogy starter kit. It has Ancestry DNA kit, which is a $99 value, and a membership to Ancestry for 6 months, which is a $149 value, a Napa Valley Genealogical Society 1-year membership, which is $30. It has a book called The Genealogist's Companion and Source Book and Organizing Your Family History book. It's a value of well over $300, and the bidding starts at $50. So feel free to check that out if you're interested.
And if you look on the website and go to the auction site, it'll be obvious, but the basket is called Finding Your Roots. Well, we've come to the end of today's presentation. And to conclude, here's a cartoon from American Ancestors, which is the journal of the New England Historic Genealogical Society based in Boston. We can assume that the person here in the cartoon is a genealogist because he or she says, "Yes, I'm a tree hugger, a family tree hugger." If you've made it this far with us, you may be a tree hugger too. So welcome to the club. It looks like we do have some time for answering questions or responding to comments if there are any. So first, we're going to stop screen sharing.
Okay.
Let's see. I don't know. Again, I don't have access to my cursor. So can you?
If you hit escape, you'll get out of the slideshow, and then at the top it should say stop sharing.
There we go.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tess.
We got it?
You're welcome.
Good.
All right, so we're going to start with the first question that we have here on the chat box, which is from Ellen Weaver. Any idea when NVGS members will have access to the library again? I miss those databases.
All right. You want to answer that, Sally?
So we don't know for sure, but since we just encountered the shift in things being lifted a bit, we are still apparently in the deep purple in Napa County. And so, we're hopeful that sometime in the next, month that we can at least open safely for people to come by appointment. They could call and request a time, and a volunteer or board member would meet you there and be with you there while you use the computers by appointment. And we'll keep membership updated. We have a newsletter coming out soon. Our website is currently being updated, and so that will be launched soon. There's a lot of ways to stay in touch, and we're working hard to stay in touch as well.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll send out an email to members that when we're ready to take the next step.
Right. And just a reminder that the Napa County Library is open without appointment. So if you need to come in and use a computer, you can do that for 1 hour. You can look at our family history research section like we were talking about earlier, Napa history section. So that could be a good thing to do in the meantime. All right, next question from Ribel. How hard is it to find records from countries like Italy? So I think more so, how would you start with the international?
Well, one thing to note is that the version of Ancestry.com that we have in the library is the International or World Explorer version, which includes international records. So, of course, not every record will be there, but that would be a place to start and to see if they have anything from Italy. And as long as you can read Italian, you're fine. No.
You need a translator for that.
And there are wonderful, wonderful books about researching different ethnic backgrounds. I have a bookshelf on my shelf about researching your Polish ancestors, but I know there are ones about Italian. And the New England Historic Genealogical Society that I mentioned has a lot of those books available in their bookstore. So I bet you might even be able to access that bookstore with a guest membership or going onto their website. Because I mean, and many times some of these organizations have tutorials. I think Family Search does, for example, specifically about Italian and other
Irish.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, I think you'd have to go to some of those sources to get started and perhaps go beyond where you are now.
But definitely the Ancestry International World Explorer would be the way to go too. Yeah. Okay. Next question from Dana. So are we able to get indexing errors changed on a transcription of a census?
Good question. I wish Mary was on with us, but I know that people do edit, and there is a way to do that. I have not personally done it, although I think maybe we ought to.
Yeah, we want to do that with my mother's death certificate.
Well, and that's,
for sure.
with a death certificate, there's probably a process for doing that. And I think that feels important. But when you go into Ancestry and find a mistake, there are ways to submit information to try to correct that. And in fact, I think that's one of the great things about Ancestry. If you go to their help section, or they will explain to you how to go about that. So it might take a little navigating.
Okay, Mary, I saw that you if you have an answer to that. Oh, it seems like you're muted. I can't hear you.
I wonder, is there a way for her to unmute?
She's not muted on here. I just can't hear.
Mary, can you hear me?
She may need to go to her microphone and select a different speaker type or microphone type.
Okay, well, we'll come back if we have time for that answer. Let's see. Dana also said, will these charts be made available in the group outline, or at least the references, like those family group charts that you had?
Yes, absolutely. We will do that.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Let's see. One other one. Is there other ways to find marriages in California other than Ancestry?
Okay.
Well, if somebody knows about a specific marriage that they're looking for, then they can try to pursue that through the local, county records, that kind of thing. But they would have some specific information.
So obviously an important step is knowing the location.
Yeah.
If you know that, then you're a step ahead there. Sometimes using this, if it's person has lived long enough ago that their census records, that of course can be a way to verify where they live. But then many times then I've literally Googled, tried to find out where those records, those vital records, are kept in that state. So here in California, it's often at the county level. And so going to a county website, and then there'll be a county recorder, something like that. And literally you can finally get to a place where it instructs you how to request a certificate. And we didn't mention this before, but there are two levels of certificates. One are the certified ones. Sometimes you can't get those unless you can prove that you're a blood family, relation. But then oftentimes, if not that, you can get what's called an informational copy. It's not legal for certain purposes, but it gives you the information you want as a genealogist. So that's what I would recommend, using the internet that way.
Right. Okay. Maybe finding the location of where the marriage may have taken place. Well, that's very helpful.
Sometimes if you go on Ancestry, they will show you, California indexes of marriages or deaths, things like that. And then that will give you the clue of what you need to go further and actually request the record. Sometimes they will be a little box next to the index saying, request this record. And it will take you through an independent program called Vital Check. And they become kind of the middleman for accessing the record from the local repository. And then you pay them in order to get it and have it mailed to you.
Okay, so if you see that, that's a good option to check that. I see Mary wrote an answer in the chat box. That's very helpful. FamilySearch.org allows a few corrections. We're talking again about the census or index corrections. Ancestry allows additions, but usually does not change the index. Both will be picked up when you search.
Great.
Oh, I would just want to since we are on this subject, just add a note about, a lot of people start with something like Ancestry and they get very gripped by that. And it can be really wonderful, very helpful in so many ways. But public information is not necessarily accurate information. And so as a genealogist, I think it's important to know that. It can be very exciting when you get on Ancestry. You think, oh, I found this person. And that happened to me about 12 years ago. It was like I found this person, and they have a picture on their website of who they're naming, and I read all the names under the picture, and I was shocked because one of the people they named was not that person. It was my grandmother, and I have many pictures of her, and I knew her, so I know that it wasn't the person that they named, So I was able to get in touch with them and say, you have a little bit of an error on your tree. And so you need to kind of look at that. That's my grandmother, and this is her name. And, he wrote back and was very appreciative that I corrected that. And he said, I just found the picture and I thought it was these people. And that was fine. People do that, but it can be very confusing for people who are using that to do research.
And let me add that Sally's referring to a part of Ancestry where people from the public can post their family tree. So Ancestry is not really responsible for that accuracy of that information. In our preparation for this program, we were, just as for fun, we decided to look and see if we could find online who were the parents of William W. Barrett. That's Sally's great-great-grandfather. And so we put that in the search, and we noticed that somebody had posted a family tree with him in it. We were very excited. And when we looked at the family tree, we noted that for some odd reason, they had listed 2 fathers and didn't tell us which one was the correct one. And not only that, there were no sources cited. So we are holding that with a major grain of salt, keeping those names just as possible clues, but we have a lot more to do.
That is a good point, because when you start looking at member trees that match information that you have, you think, oh yeah, it's like, wow, all this information, and then it might not be accurate.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's really very helpful to be able to look at that and note that there were no sources cited.
Right.
So when entering information into those kinds of sites where you're putting your family tree up, it really is nice to have listed the sources that you got the information from.
Right. Okay, I think we're about out of time. I want to thank Mark and Sally again for such an informative, fascinating presentation. We all learned so much. And check the Napa County Library website for more virtual events. We may have another one of these coming up, so just keep your eye out for it. And everyone have a great Saturday.
Thanks, Tess.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, guys.